Hello, Bruce.
Hello, Steve. How's it going?
We meet again.
We meet again.
Your beard's even bushier. I'm going to one day, if they keep this lockdown going, if they put us back into lockdown, eventually I'll get there in some shape or form.
Yeah, it's a lot of dedication. The beard growing. It's a good hobby.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, you've got one up on me with that one. That's good. Yeah. So, thank you for catching up with me tonight. I've really been looking forward to this. The last couple of articles that you've written have been brilliant on UK Column. So, and we'll talk about them. So tonight we're going to cover a lot of people have been there's people joining the group just now, so we'll just have a sort of wee preamble here of discussion, but a lot of people have been very interested in this interview and this discussion because this is now beginning to feel very much like a psychological attack, and that was the headline of one of your articles, the psychological attack on the UK. And that is what it's feeling like. I think at the start, when we were saying to people, this is not right, a lot of people were saying, you're not right. But in reality, I think more and more people are realizing that this is not right. And tonight, I want to sort of cover some of those reasons why there's a psychology behind this. But Bruce, your background, you are a psychologist to trade, is that right?
Yeah, I did a degree in psychology, and then I did a PhD in psychology. And my PhD was involved looking at unconscious and conscious information processing
Mm-hmm.
in primarily depression, and looking at the effects of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor antidepressants like Prozac or Seroxat. Some people might be familiar with those antidepressants. And so I did my PhD in that, and then I got very interested in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. So I trained as a psychoanalyst at the Philadelphia Association in London for several years, and that's what I've been doing for few years now, quite a few years now. So I've got a background in both academic sort of experimental psychology and psychoanalysis. So it's quite
Yeah.
a in psychoanalysis is quite different from academic psychology. I mean, a lot of academic psychologists don't really recognise because it's very difficult to evidence based to prove evidence the psychoanalysis is a valid treatment, because it's very difficult to measure it and to essentially it's two people meeting in a room.
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's quite a basic human thing, which is quite relevant to what's going on now.
Yeah.
It's no accident that we're doing isolation, social distancing, and separating people, because actually deep down, the psychologists who are in the UK government who are running this show know fine exactly well that stopping people meeting will be bad for their health, because ordinary meeting of people is very, very healing and very helpful.
Yeah. No, just for because there's two sort of types of people will be watching this tonight, if that makes any sense. We've got a private group watching this who kind of study this stuff fairly closely. They're not happy with what's going on. They're vocal about it. Uh, we've got another group that's a public group. So one group's private, another group's public, um, which means it will go out to a bit further afield. So there'll be people who will watch this who are not in the types of groups that are speaking out about this stuff. Bruce, do you want to explain a bit about where psychological strategies are actually forming a part of government, so that people can understand that there is actual behavioural strategies being applied here?
Uh, well, historically, I mean, the use of psychology on the public is not unique to the COVID-19 situation.
Mm-hmm.
Several years ago, 2015-16, there was a big, well, longer than that actually, but there was a big issue amongst the psychotherapy world. The UK government were using a group called the Behavioural Insights team. And I think it was in Mindspace.
Private company?
A private company, but kind of aligned with the Cabinet Office. And
yeah.
they...
So maybe politicians who'd served their time, but now they get kind of jobs for the boys type thing and contracts for the boys.
Yeah.
Paid for by the government, but paying a private company ran by ex-politicians and their pals, basically.
Yeah. And it was 2016 that'd be David Cameron would be Prime Minister then, wasn't it? Was it? I think I can't remember. But anyways, they identified a niche market, which was unemployed people, and to get unemployed people out of unemployment, they thought what a great idea would be to implement psychological treatment in job centres, cognitive behavioural therapy, and of course, psychological treatment, even in an NHS setting or in a private setting, is a very private, confidential thing. But to have a psychological treatment sort of thing going on in the job centre, which your benefits are attached to, a lot of people thought the ethics of that was actually disgraceful, because it was essentially a psychopathologization of being unemployed. And people on the left, especially a lot of people on the left, were absolutely up in arms, because of course they just seen this as a
what was it they were doing?
Well, they were the government.
Yeah, what were they actually doing to apply the psychology in the
They
job
were
centres?
getting therapists and installing them in job centres to give CBT to job seekers. So essentially, it was a psychopathologization of unemployment. Of course, if you have a downturn in the economy and things go bad, you've got to get people unemployed. It's got nothing to do with their mental state. But with this very subtle, and many people thought it was very sinister, especially people on the left, of course, they felt that this was too much. They protested against this, and I protested against it as well. And a lot of the psychological organisations, big psychological organisations like the British Psychological Society, the United Kingdom, UKCP, the BACP, all these big organisations, they didn't say a word against it. They didn't show much protest against it, so they've got a form of nudging people. You know, they call it the nudge unit, and of course they could tell for many years before that as well. A lot of people were becoming mentally distressed in this country. More and more people were being prescribed antidepressants. More and more people were needing psychological help because of this authoritarianism's been brewing for not just before COVID, of course, in different ways. You know, and look at the Scottish government with the named person scheme for children and all that kind of very authoritarian, sinister stuff coming into play. And the government wanted to introduce what's known as improved access to psychological therapy, which is very cheap, very minimally trained people, providing six sessions to people who came for psychological treatment, because again the NHS for years has been underfunded, and this is not mentioned much in the news. So for example, every winter, you know, the hospitals are under strain for flu. If you just look back at the newspaper, the history of it, and of course psychological treatments have been struggling for many years. The waiting lists for psychological treatments in a lot of places are huge. So they thought, well, how are we going to deal with all this? So they've got this very cheap and easy cognitive behavioural therapy called IAPT involved, and they had these behavioural psychologists involved there, and it's a guy called Lord Laillard, who was a prime shaker with Tony Blair. This is what it started back in the Tony Blair era, and so these nudges in behavioural interventions have been long-standing. So it's no surprise that now in the COVID era, the curtains have been drawn. We can see really now in full bore what's going on.
This idea of being nudged along, psychologically convinced over time, very subtly, like death by 1,000 cuts type thing. Can you explain that in a wee bit of detail, just for people who might not have heard of that sort of nudge theory? Because I posted on that the other day, and it was somebody had raised it to my attention, and I had heard about it a few times, and I thought, yeah, that's a subject that needs to be discussed in a lot more detail so that people can see it and understand it better.
Well, yeah, it's kind of partly propaganda and partly it's working on the basis of making people change their behaviours almost unknowingly, without their awareness.
Would it change their behaviours and their views and their sort of attitudes and beliefs as well? Would it change more than just their behaviours? Actually, change how they even question things or challenge things?
Well, for various things, I can some of the projects the behavioural insights team were involved with was things like how can you get people to pay their taxes quicker, or be more reliable because without missing the date, send them emails, things like that, or intermittent emails, moving up to the time of when the tax return's coming. This kind of so it nudges people to do things. But I mean, a blatant one is that kind of guilt trip thing. I mean, that's a nudge. This government poster about look him in the eyes and tell him the risk isn't real. That is a nudge. That's a inducing guilt of what you're behaving. You should change your behaviour. And basically a shaming behaviour. And when it came to the psychological treatment in job centres, that was a kind of very subtle form of guilt tripping, because it was putting the onus of a person's unemployment on their own psychic lack, that they weren't mentally up for. An unemployed person going to the job centre, they would be going to sign on and be getting like help from the people at the job centre to find a job. Here's a list of vacancies, and there's a job club you can go to, and interview skills and all that. By the way, have you ever thought about psychological treatment? That's CBT.
Yeah.
And some people were really coerced to do it against their will. So it put this idea of you feel a person who's unemployed who wants a job feels bad enough because they're unemployed. I mean, I've been unemployed. I know what it's like.
They might think it might have looked bad on them if they didn't take it. It was a thing to improve them. Therefore, if you refuse it, you might not be as accommodating or as interested as others.
Yeah, but there's this. So you have the state on one hand hanging over the job centre, the government, the benefits, and then on the other hand, this very intimate kind of meeting with a therapist, discussing your innermost fears, doubts, personal challenges in life, and getting that mixed in with the state, because psychotherapy generally is the most confident, like the confessional. It's the most intimate, confidential relationships, and to compromise that is the big ethical no-no. And so that's the form, because as we see, the government are wanting to get into our lives in so many ways now, and they are getting into our lives in so many ways.
The amount of control that they've got at the moment is you couldn't have fathomed it a year ago, the amount of control that they've got now, or the supposed control that they've got, or the control they're trying to get. Bruce, you wrote an article that went really well for the UK column, which is a channel that it basically delivers real news on what's happening. It's very on the money. The presenters there are absolutely excellent. It's in a very digestible format. You know David Scott there and Brian and Mike and the guys. They're a good team of guys. A channel that everybody should tune into. Switch off the BBC and tune into that, because it's absolutely real news. It's gripping. You really want to sit down and tune into it and watch it. Now, you wrote an article for their website called "The Psychological Attack on the UK," and they've been raving about it ever since, and it got loads of hits and loads of really good feedback. Do you want to, for the benefit, just to sort of set the stage for what we're actually discussing tonight, do you want to sort of try and summarise the essence of that particular article and
right
what you covered in it?
Yeah, well, essentially, it came to my UK comms attention first. I think that's how I learned about it, through watching the news. That there was a group of psychologists on Sage, the SPI special. I don't know what the acronym means, but it's SPI-B. It's the applied psychologist team of Sage, and they were tasked with advising the UK and Scottish governments, along with the behavioural insights team, how to get in people to adhere to the COVID-19 restrictions. And their document, which is available on the government website, I don't know if it's still there now, but it was reported in the UK Column News on the 11th of May. That's when I learned about it. And it stated the following from the document of SPI-B. It said, a substantial number of people still do not feel sufficiently personally threatened. Right? And the perceived level of personal threat needs to be increased among those who are complacent, using hard-hitting emotional messages. And so
this is advice. This is advice that they're giving our government, this separate team.
Yeah. So they're basically saying to the government, right, you want people to follow the COVID-19 regulations. Essentially, you need to make them feel threatened with what's going on, to make them adhere to the social distancing, to the stay at home, to the stay at home, don't see their family, shut down their business, make them fear, make them frightened, and of course the perceived level of personal threat needs to be increased amongst people who are complacent, people who are thinking, oh, there's no problem here, it's only a virus, and to use hard-hitting emotional messages in bombarding the TVs with propaganda. and so the SPI-B suggested to government to use in the promotion of social approval for desired behaviours, and to consider enacting legislation to compel required behaviours, and to consider the use of social disapproval for failure to comply. You know, that snitch on your neighbour thing.
Yeah, the social shaming. Don't say I don't want to wear a mask, or I don't agree with wearing a mask, or I don't agree with the testing regime, or I think the tests are faulty.
Yeah, and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Don't say anything about it because somebody had a bad experience, or somebody's family, it's personal to somebody's family. Therefore, so don't talk out about it at all. Just social shaming.
Yeah, and
I think everybody listening to this would understand that, and I think there's maybe people over the next couple of days who might watch it, Bruce, who won't understand it until they actually try and speak out about this thing and realise how quickly people can turn on you when you talk about this. But the problem is that not enough people are talking about it. Just if everybody started, forget protests, forget civil disobedience. If people started talking to each other without slagging each other about this, we might actually get somewhere.
Yeah, well, and it's finding out the kind of holes in the logic here. I mean, because when I seen this from SPI-B, I thought, well, the British Psychological Society have got a code of ethics and practice guidelines, and so has the Healthcare Professions Council, which regulates psychologists. I mean,
you can't abuse your skills. You know how to manipulate people, with, for want of a better way to phrase it.
Yeah, because Spy B are full of psychologists who, some are member of the well, most of them are a member of the British Psychological Society, but you only have to be a member of the HCPC, the Health and Care Professions Council, if you are a practitioner psychologist. So someone like Professor Susan Mitchie of Spy B, she's registered with the Health and Care Professions Council, and they are tasked with regulating psychologists, and they are their motto is, was their motto a few years ago, was protection of the public, or we are protectors of the public. But as I've just started this little story about Spy B, their remit in Susan Mitchie's remit has been about not protecting the public, but making people more fearful, making people more personally threatened. Now, when I read that, and I thought, this doesn't sound right. This doesn't sound right at all. I mean, so I went to the British Psychological Society ethics guidelines, and I went through them, and it's very obvious things like psychologists value the dignity, worth of all persons with sensitivity to the dynamics of perceived authority or influence over persons and peoples, with particular regard to people's rights. Now, the dynamics of perceived authority. This is very interesting because this relates to my experience of academia, because for many years when I was doing my PhD, and I met my wife, she was doing a PhD, and she was working on a project, and a lot of other people in her area, in her group, including a woman called Professor Lucy Yardley, who's now on Spy B, interestingly. They were looking at how people believe a treatment works, or how people get better, looking at things like the placebo effect, looking at how people can be convinced to take up a treatment, how people can be encouraged to maintain a regime of occupational health or something like that. A lot of health behaviors, and interestingly, a lot of in my wife's work, it was involved with how people got better in regards to kind of chronic acupuncture and chronic pain, how people got better. And they found that, and it corroborated a lot of research, a lot of other research, and I think all these research goes towards government, informs government how to deal with the public. She found that essentially it didn't matter, because they had a sham acupuncture treatment, and they had a real one. It's a fake needle that didn't go in, and but the treatment worked if the patient thought the person giving the treatment was a doctor in a white coat. If the patient thought it was just like a nurse, or if it was just somebody else lower down the hierarchy, so to speak, the treatment wouldn't work. But if they thought it was a doctor in a white coat with a stethoscope, their bad knee got better. Now, this is very relevant, because with all the propaganda we're going on with COVID-19, a lot of people will believe the Chris Whitties and the Patrick Valence's standing there spouting their science, but only because they've got professor at the front of their name.
Yep.
It doesn't mean the influence of that fact of their medical qualifications is for many people will be, well, it's real, but this is a huge trick they play in people. Yeah. Huge trick. So anyway, so I went through the ethics, and it's the safeguarding one's quite interesting. I'll focus on that. The document highlights that safeguarding means protecting people's health, well-being, and human rights, enabling to live free from harms, abuse, and neglect. And abuse takes many forms. and cuts through the various domains of life. Categories below are referred, this is quoting from the document, refer to investigation, legislation context, and they're not mutually exclusive. So some of the safeguarding things you have to look out for as a psychologist is physical abuse, the use of physical force or mistreatment by one person or another, which may or may not result in actual physical harm. So think of face masks in schools, psychological emotional abuse is that psychologically harmful or inflicts mental distress by threat, humiliation, or other non-verbal conduct. This may include threats of blaming, controlling, intimidation, or coercion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that intimidation or that humiliation, there'll be kids who are not wanting to wear a mask for talking sake, might be exempt, but might just wear it just to keep the peace and not to be, out of the in crowd type thing. They're going to be sitting all day, at odds with their own beliefs, sitting there in a mask when you don't believe in it, just to be part of something. It'd be horrible for those kids.
Yeah.
That is a form of psychological torture. There's been, and I think most of the parents in groups like ours are up in arms about that. They don't like this, but there must be, for every group we've got, there's tens of thousands, millions of parents who are really unhappy with this, but they don't have anywhere to turn, and they're not talking about it. They're just kind of accepting it.
Well,
or they might speak out about it in a crowd. They might speak out about it at the school gate. They might try and talk to another mother and say, "I'm not really too happy about this," and she'll say, "Well, what do you mean? We're all doing it. It's for the greater good," type thing. That conversation, and then you're back in your box, and now your kid's doing something that you're doing something to your kid that you don't want to do. Your kid's doing something they don't want to do because of this pressure pot that they've created here.
Yeah, well, you see, I wrote about the mask thing in another article. It was on the Off Guardian. This article here, see it?
Yep, the cult of the brave new normal. Yep.
I wrote about the ritualistic aspects of mask wearing, social distancing, and isolation for stay at home, isolating people in the community, and it's extremely ritualistic. It's what cult leaders do. It's what it's these meaningless, pointless behaviors. It's what's very prevalent in the BDSM community. The master slave kind of dynamic that goes on.
Don't know anything about that, but there you go.
And and well, so
there'll be somebody in the audience who could answer all your questions on that, I'm sure.
But it's this wear a mask, and it's very cult-like and very, it's perverse, not in a sort of sexual sense, but it's perverted kind of the message from the government, in as much as that, like a domestic abuser, which I go in the psychological talk in the UK. I go into show you how exactly these measures are very much like psychological abuse. But in an domestic abuser, what they do is, if you just do this for a little while, then I'll let you off, and you'll get your reward, you get your treat, like 3 weeks to flatten the curve. And then when that comes along, oh no. Well, you've obviously been too complacent, so we're going to have to lock down again. So you just have to, and by the way, you have to put a mask on outside now. And in these little incremental things, that the little bit of hope, then they bring them down, then the hope, then they're bringing them down.
Like Christmas, like the Christmas one was a good example of that. Yes. I was disappointed in myself, actually, to be thinking of 5 days at Christmas, where you can actually throw open your doors and you don't have the curtain twitching neighbours, and you can have anybody up you want, and then that gets stolen as well. Now, we're all doing whatever we want to do anyway, but people are considerate of their neighbours. That whole Christmas one is a very good example of that. They dangled that carrot, and right up to the last minute, they then took it away. They blew Christmas apart. And Bruce, they are capable of going for another Christmas from us.
Yeah.
They are capable of that right now. I would actually put money on it that there'd be a very good chance that Christmas this year will not be a walk in the park. It will not be straightforward with these people.
Well, this is the it's the same with the vaccine, isn't it? They said way ago, before the vaccine was developed, it was like this will be the only way we'll get out of this. Now it's here, and they're taking that away as well because there's all these
Exactly.
It's never going to end because they don't want it to end. So
well,
they are lying. They are lying, and but this keeping people isolated away from their friends and their family. Well, who else does that? Domestic abusers do that to people.
Yep.
Domestic abusers. I mean, I've worked with people who've been domestically abused, and they, so they'll say, "Oh, you're not going to see your mum and dad this Christmas. You've got to stay with me instead."
Mm-hmm.
And then next Christmas comes, and it's, "What do you mean you will go to your mum and dad's for Christmas? My mum's not feeling great this year, so we'll have to stay with her." And it goes on and on and on, and of course, domestic abusers abuse people with psychological abuse, emotional abuse, guilt tripping, gaslighting, but also financial abuse. And who else is financially abusing us by stopping us working? The government. They're stopping it. They're making people go bankrupt on a lie because the data. Ninth? It's the ninth in all-cause death 2020. Ninth in the last 20 years. 99.9% chance of not dying from COVID if you're under 60. Why exactly are we locked down? I mean, the facts. I mean, it's quite clear those two kind of figures. They're so, because this is the weird thing, right? Well, it's not weird. Most ordinary people haven't got the time to go through statistics, documents of what vaccines do, etc. There's so much information overload. I mean, for me, I can't keep up with it all. And
the way they throw numbers about, though, it's bamboozling. So you end up just getting to a stage where a lot of people, I would imagine, would just say, "Well, it must be true." And if you read between the lines, it's just all bad news. It doesn't matter how they present the R number. I mean, there's a classic example of it. The R number, this number that's bordering around 1, oh, it's 0.7. Oh, 0.7, that's good. 1.2, bad. Look at the difference. It's such small differences,
Yeah.
Such a small, volume switch to fear up or down, fear up or, they can just, it's 1.2, but how do we know it's 1.2? Based on what? Faulty tests?
You know what infuriates me? I mean, when I did my PhD, I studied statistics. I studied how to analyze data and read it, and when I listen to something like Nicola Sturgeon's daily briefing, and she talks about COVID and the figures and what might and might not happen and the variants, essentially she's talking out her backside. I mean, it is not science. She's making it up. She's completely making it up every single day. And of course, she's the person in authority. Most people think, oh well, she's in authority. She's the leader. She must know. And then she has a medical person next to her, Jason Leach.
Oh God!
But it's like.
Have you seen his TV advert? That TV advert. I don't know why they picked him for it.
Oh, and it's terrible. He's terrible.
But surely they know the man's got no credibility whatsoever. Like, no, but I don't think there's. Even if you've not woken up to what's going on, you couldn't watch Jason Leach and be influenced by Jason Leach. Surely to God.
Well, I mean, I suppose as I go back to my thing about the research, it shows that people are very easily convinced that their chronic pain will disappear if they're talking to a doctor who they think's a doctor or telling to do something. So if Jason Leach tells someone to put a mask on because it's got to save them and save their loved ones, a lot of people will believe it because he's a medical person.
Yeah.
You know, essentially. But it was Dennis Ranakour in Canada who said, if you want to look at a couple of things that puts things into perspective, is the all-cause death, or in your country, which in Britain, which is ninth worst in the last 20 years, which is so nothing really is going on. The usual seasonal viral deaths, and the look at the statistics of the demographics. What is the risk of dying? And it's so minuscule for most people. And people with kidney problems or dementia or other sort of physical, I can't remember the main physical ailments, but those people are more likely to die from COVID or with COVID-19. So and of course there's the evidence from the countries who haven't locked down, and there's nothing dramatic goes on there. So those 3 or 4 facts, if you can get a handle on 3 or 4 facts and say this is not quite right.
Why can't they though? Why can't people get a handle on at least 3 or 4 of those facts?
Well, because you still have the chief medical officer standing at the podium with Nicola Sturgeon or with Boris Johnson. It's very interesting because before
the BBC misrepresent, the stats are getting misrepresented, because you're saying like all deaths or all causes of deaths. This is 9th worst year in the last 20 years. I saw exactly the same thing and been presented on BBC around the time where people like us were trying to get that message out to say this is not a particularly bad year. And then I watched it on BBC, and I knew they were lying because I knew it was ninth worst or whatever. But they presented it as the worst, and they had all the stats to back it up. But guy standing next to huge big graphs, and they presented it. And I'll tell you, I don't care what our argument was, it was blown away that day by the BBC. Now, if that's wrong, how can they say it's the worst year? They were saying it was the worst since the war. You remember that, Bruce? They were saying that it was the worst since the war. Now, we're getting people throwing that back in our face when we're talking to them on Facebook. We're saying it's not even a bad year, and they're saying it's the worst since the war. We hear them regurgitating what BBC have said to them, sound bites that they've listened to, and now they're repeating them. That's a psychological attack, isn't it, as well? They're using the media to convince people and then argue the cause.
Yeah, well, they're coming out with the thing of all these other people who say different things to us are spreading disinformation, but actually the government are spreading disinformation about a lot of things. I mean, one thing that came to mind was it was terrible. I thought was the drug czar. I can't remember his name. Something Zawani. I can't remember his proper name. Apologies, but he was getting questioned about people were hesitant, and especially people who are women who might want to get pregnant or who are pregnant or are concerned about their fertility. And he says, it's perfectly safe. I mean, that is a blatant lie.
Yeah.
It's a blatant lie, because if you go to the Pfizer website, it talks about the information sheet about their vaccine. They don't know what long-term effects will have on conception or pregnancy, because it's not been tested. Studies are ongoing now, but they're wanting people to take up the vaccine before the results of these studies are known. I mean, how irresponsible is that?
Well, I watched.
Just to finish, in the say, well, we're going to bring in vaccine passports. Well, 50% of the people who go on holiday, right, will be women, and they'll, a lot of those women will be maybe want to get pregnant or are pregnant. So, and you've got to try and coerce people to take a vaccine, mRNA, to take so they can go on holiday, and you don't know what the long-term effects will be. And of course, on the adverse reactions indicators, there's been quite an alarming indicators of spontaneous miscarriage after having the vaccine. So, I mean, you could say, well, fine, if you're an old person, 90, 85, 90, take the vaccine perhaps. But then a woman who's 25 or 35 is like, I want to start a family. I know women in social care. Someone got in touch with me today, actually. The bosses are threatening them that they'll lose their job if they don't take the vaccine. And she wants
disgraceful.
And she wants to get pregnant. She wants to have a child. And I sent her some photo things that I had, documents to say, the effects are unknown, what this vaccine will do for fertility or for if you do get pregnant. Because it's irresponsible. So fair enough, develop a vaccine, promote it. The government can promote it. But why aren't they being pragmatic and open with the facts? That's quite sinister, I think. They should at least be open. And Matt Hancock, again, he lied in Parliament. The MP for Basildon, I think it was, asked him if the COVID-19 vaccines had been developed the same ways as other vaccines and for the safety, etc. And he said it was exactly the same way, right? Well, that's a lie. The MHRA sanctioned the rush development of the vaccines.
Absolutely. And one of the things that they did, because I watched the MHRA the day that they were approving, it was the Pfizer one first, the day they were approving it. And one of the questions that was asked was, is it okay for pregnant women to take, or women who want to get pregnant? And he said, look, there's not enough tests, not enough studies been done on that, so I can't answer that question. But the advice I would give you is that the woman should ask her doctor and they should decide together. Now, that's his medical advice. We don't know what in God's name is going to happen to these women and their babies and their chances of having a baby. But chat to your doctor who knows even less about it than we do, and it's got no chance. And if that woman's feeling that she's more worried about COVID and she's thinking, I don't want to protect, should I take it? And the doctor thinks she wants it, I'll lean that way. The patient could talk the doctor into it, and both of them are basing it on what they've seen on the TV.
Exactly. And the thing is, if you went, I got the ethics application papers from the Oxford vaccine trial through a Freedom of Information request. And the exclusion criteria for the Oxford vaccine was that if you were pregnant, you weren't allowed to take part in the trial. And if you got pregnant during the trial, you were going to have to be monitored. But anyways, it was excluded. You weren't allowed to be pregnant to take part in the trial. And if you got pregnant, you had to inform the study and say, I've got pregnant. So they obviously have concerns about it, because it's not known. And of course, they did say they don't know what the long-term effect of this vaccine will be.
It's been quite instant, some of those miscarriages and things, haven't they? I think, obviously it could have happened out there, so I don't want to talk about that too much, but they do report all incidences, don't they? All vaccine damage. They talk about it, or they've got to log it. And those statistics are now becoming available. They're not kid-on facts. They don't look particularly good.
No, they don't look good. I mean, I've seen various figures, facts and figures, and it's not good.
And that's early days, Bruce. This is very early days.
This is early days, but what are the effects been 2 years?
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen a picture today of someone got the vaccine that had blood blisters all over their hands. An old woman. A friend of mine got the vaccine, healthy, 50 years old, didn't didn't drink, didn't smoke, healthy. She was in bed for 5 days with flu-like symptoms, temperature, and a really bad migraine. It knocked her for 6, you know. And I know other people who had got the vaccine, and someone in my family, and they got the vaccine. Next day, chest infection. Been on antibiotics for 3 weeks now. Can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
You know,
it's absolutely crazy. Now, Bruce, just coming on to this other article. So you wrote that article, The Psychological Attack in the UK, and that was well received that in the UK column, and that kind of set the stage. The next article you wrote was very good because that was talking about the ethical psychotherapy versus unethical applied psychology. Now, this is not. This is a bit deeper stuff, but it's stuff that I think is worth covering because people in our groups would like to understand this more. I'd like to understand it more, but there's people out there I think should delve into this in a bit more detail about what's going on. Like ethical behaviour within psychotherapy versus what's going on. If I'm reading between the lines, the governing bodies within psychotherapy are up in arms about what the government are doing. Is that correct? They're not happy. They're breaking they're stepping over all sorts of lines with the way they're treating the public.
Well, no, the governing bodies are utterly silent.
Okay.
The British Psychological Society is silent. All the regulator of the psychology, the Health and Care Professions Council are silent. You know, as I outlined in my first article, they're breaking the ethical guidelines by making people more fearful and all the other tactics they're using. So just to put that aside. Now, in a sort of scenario where someone was frightened of a virus, I gave an example in my latest article of a man who was 50, healthy, didn't drink, didn't smoke, and you know, he was really frightened about catching a virus. I just say a virus.
Yeah.
And every sniffle, sneeze, he interpreted as a sign of the virus. And he obsessively ruminated about his symptoms. He searched for the symptoms on the internet to validate his concerns. He never went out anytime, only for shopping. He got his shopping delivered when he can. He never meets anyone, doesn't see his girlfriend, doesn't see his children. And I gave the example of like, so he goes to the supermarket, he wears 2 masks, he wears gloves. When he gets home, he washes his shopping. Some people wash their shopping and leave it for 3 or 4 days before they touch it again. And so he did this, and and he can't see any way out of it. And I gave the example that where he had a kind of breakdown. He's seen the bin men coming. The bin men weren't wearing masks or gloves, and he got up out of his bed and ran down the stairs and shouted at them, and basically just had a mental breakdown and was sectioned. And I gave the sort of hypothetical example of him being assessed by a cognitive behavioural therapist in the hospital. And so essentially, he recounts how he got there and recounts his symptoms. And this is what the psychologist said. And I'll just read what I wrote. The psychologist says, "You're quite correct. You have to act like you have the virus. It seems like perhaps you've not been fearful enough. You went out in the street and you confronted the waste disposal men from other households outside with no protective clothing on. That was very foolish. You could have spread the disease or caught it from the men. You have been too complacent. You must continue with what you're doing. You must keep vigilant. How could you look into the eyes of a person dying from the virus, knowing that you might have spread it? I know how lone you are and that you have not seen your girlfriend or children for many months, and you're going out of your mind, but you must keep strong. We may find a medicine that can allow you to see light at the end of the tunnel, but the new medicine is unlikely to stop the spread of contracting the virus. It is likely that you will have to be vigilant for some time. That's exactly what the government are telling people. Now, bearing in mind, and of course, he questions her and says, well, when will there be an end to this? And she says, oh, to take your mind off it. Watch the Six. I see you were a rugby player in your youth. What the Six Nations is on? She says, what do you mean the Six Nations is on? I thought it was a deadly pandemic. I thought, this is ridiculous. Oh, don't question this logic. It's just ignore it. And it's that's the sort of that. Then that's what the ordinary public would be subjected to. Now, ordinarily, if a person like David who went to a therapist, 50 years old, healthy, no underlying health conditions, a 99.9% chance of not dying from COVID, what would happen there would be, for example, here it is.
This is good psychotherapy now. This is what should happen.
Therapy. So basically, a therapist would look at a person's tendency to interpret their present experience in a negatively biased way, because people obsessively ruminating, who have these obsessions, they see the world as making unsurmountable demands and obstacles which prevent fulfillment of life's goals. So first, a therapist would educate David on the nature of his obsessive thoughts, his anxiety and depression, and on a result of his thought processes. And so they would say, well, what's the evidence for them? What's the evidence for you dying? What is the evidence for you having to do all these ritualistic behaviors to minimize risk? I mean, what kind of risk are you trying to minimize? You're 50. A sniffle. It's hay fever season. Maybe that's why you're sniffling. Look at the alternatives. So you would try to help the person see the world in a more realistic way, rather than, oh, actually, you know what? You actually should be more fearful, And so someone say someone who's very vulnerable at the moment, who's mentally distressed in some way or prone to become mentally distressed, right? The government should be telling people who statistically are not really in danger is not to panic, is not to be fearful.
That's it. That's it in a nutshell. And they are making us panic. They want you in that state of fear because you're easier to control.
Exactly.
They put us there and they're keeping us there, and it's 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
And I still flick on if I have my lunch. I stick on BBC just to see what they're up to. It's unbelievable, Bruce. The level, some of the things that they say. One of the things that a presenter on BBC said today, just a little snippet, but it was very relevant. It was almost like she said something in passing. I think I was in the car at the time listening to this. It was on BBC though. It was still a TV, but I was listening to it. And in passing, she said, so the UK had better prepare for divisions of vaccinated and unvaccinated. That was what she actually said.
Yeah.
Now, it was merged into the end of one segment and the start of another one, but what she said was that's programming, isn't it? That's putting that out there, division. Because they've got that in Israel just now, haven't they? The vaccinated and the unvaccinated. Yeah. They've got that over there, and it's working its way. They're ahead of us just now. But anybody who's out there who wants to have a look in a crystal ball, have a look at what's happening in Israel. And you have a look at some alternative news on what's happening in Israel, and you see if you want that coming to the UK.
Yeah, it is shocking to see what they're doing, and that in the news things saying that we're considering vaccine passports, or we're considering we're testing children more, or vaccinating children more, and that's exactly how a domestic abuser acts. A domestic abuser never lets anyone relax, and everything they say is designed to to keep people who are anxious or who are not, to keep them in an anxious state or to make them anxious because of this.
Yeah, they're playing with your head.
Yeah, they're playing with it, because one minute they're saying, "Oh, we won't be. We're not considering mandatory vaccination." Oh, it's something we might consider the next again week, or the vaccine is the hope. Hancock crying on television. There's fake crocodile tears, right? And then 2 days later, it was, well, you know what? We have to keep social distancing even if you get the vaccine, because we don't know if it stops transmission. And that is just playing with people's minds.
Yep.
I know people who were thinking, once the vaccine arrived, that would be it. We were back to normal. Back to normal. Yeah.
What do you think? Obviously, we're about to enter into a phase of. I mean, when you think about it, that's, by the time we start to technically open up, that's the best part of another 3 months locked down.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is going to happen out there? Because people, when we're talking about the psychology of all of this, people have certainly been psychologically damaged by the fear, genuine or not, it's up to them. But, there's a lot of fear, concerns, not seeing your family, getting into bad habits, maybe people over drinking, people overthinking as well, people consuming the news, people falling out with friends, getting argumentative, worrying about things, obsessing about things. And now everybody's going to go back out into the streets again. How do you see it going? Like, society's not quite the same just now, is it? As it was
No.
a year ago?
No, there's a very interesting Italian philosopher called Giorgio Agamben, and he's very interesting for the simple fact that he is from the left intelligentsia, so to speak. A lot of the philosophers and intellectuals on the left, like like Slavoj Zizek or Noam Chomsky, for example, they're quite. They seem to be believing the COVID hype. The very intelligent and able minds, but they seem to can't read simple statistics to say that there's something going on. And Giorgio Agamben, he's talked about he got a lot of flack being on the left. He's been ostracized essentially for coming out and being against it. He's very against what's happening, but essentially he's seeing that the world has become we live our lives purely in the idea we're a biological entity to avoid death. There's nothing else, because we live day to day. We get up, if we're lucky, we go to work, or usually through Zoom. So we're not meeting people, or we're not working at all. And then we eat and we sleep, we get up. We can't plan anything normal, like we can't plan holidays, we can't plan to go to a friend, we can't have parties, we can't go to the pub. Yeah. Nothing. We've just become biological and an entity. And that is what he calls biosecurity. We're becoming a society of biosecurity. The threat of we're all biosecurity hazards. And it seems to be we're moving into that realm, and it's interesting because how we've got to keep this lie going, because 16 states in America, for example, have lifted lockdown restrictions and there's no masks. They're a perfect experimental comparison to see what's going on. Because
this is the thing that Sturgeon and Co have been able to say, and I hate when they say it. Well, we're not the only country doing this. We're not the only country. Every time they get criticised by even a question from the media, they say, "Well, it's not just us," as if But so everybody else is doing it. So you're joining all the countries of lemmings, and you're going to jump over as well. Your excuse for having us in lockdown, and we've got one of the worst lockdowns in the world. There's other countries looking at us. I've got people phoning me from Australia as if, how are you guys coping? We think about you all the time, and this whole Britain. Why is COVID so much? Is it a different disease over here or something? Why are we locked down?
Yeah.
Why is my son phoning me from a pub the other day in Adelaide?
Uh-huh.
COVID's still there, supposedly. Why is America opened up? Now, the beauty of America opening up in those states is now we can start to say, well, like Sweden, they're opening up.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have your every country in the world excuses doing it now. They've opened up. They get rid of their masks. I heard on the radio today a guy saying, look, we know how to wear masks now, so there's a good chance that, masks are going to be around for a long time. Our government want us to keep wearing masks.
Yeah.
America are saying, ditch the mask. Good. We need to start saying, we'll just take the American route, please. Thank you very much for Scotland.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? We really need to start. I don't know how you get through to them, but you need to, Bruce, we need the groundswell of people. I'm reading some comments in the comments section. Somebody said there, and I spoke to a relative today, they'll take the vaccine to go on holiday. This is a common one that we're getting. And that's acquiescence at its highest level. That's really that's a big part of the problem. Well, if the people who've got a problem would just say something, just start talking, the artificial intelligence will pick it up fairly quickly. If people are saying nothing on the phone or on their Facebook post, then the feedback that the government gets, because they monitor everything to keep their finger on the pulse, they check everything. So they're thinking just now, yeah, they're buying it, they're accepting it, they're going to go along with it. If everybody even said one thing against it, the computers would start saying, wait a minute, the UK is standing up. They're talking out. It's chatter. It's rumblings. They know from those first few words of people talking out that leads to people talking in a pub and saying, no, I'm not going to be shut down in this conversation. Don't call me a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist, because I'm telling you, I'm not doing this, and my kid's not doing this, and I'm not going to have you shut me down for it. If people would start to do that, and maybe the other guys would start to realise, well, we're just going through the motions as well. Have your own opinion, research it, have an opinion, and speak out for yourself.
It's interesting. In France, there's not been a huge vaccine uptake, and the statistics are showing that there's a lot of people don't want to take the vaccine, and they're thinking it might not get going, a vaccine passport, because of this. It won't be practical. It won't practically work. It'll be impossible to kind of implement if a lot of people don't take the vaccine or refuse it. So I think the fact that.
But that's a psychology, though, isn't it? Because they've got it. Vaccine holiday, haven't it? And people in the UK love their holidays.
But I think they keep saying, oh, there's been great take up in the UK, for example, but you don't whisk out the Queen, and you don't whisk out the celebrities, and you don't have this propaganda.
Dolly Parton.
Or Dolly Parton, if you're winning. I think they're struggling to. I think there's more people out there who are hesitant. I mean, look at NHS workers. There's a lot of NHS workers hesitant. Notably, a lot of women who are hesitant in the NHS, because of course there's the pregnancy issue, the conception issue, there's the fertility issue, because of course, and also there's a study going on about men who they're studying male fertility, because they don't know what it does to male fertility either.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if you want to get very pro-feminist, I think that the government should really take heed of the hesitancy of a lot of female NHS workers, because it's very interesting how the narrative's changed. It was clap for the hero of the NHS for quite a long time before the vaccine came, and so many people were so happy for the NHS workers to be working on the front line and with no protection from a vaccine. Right, they're quite happy for them to do that, and other workers, of course. But in the NHS, they were quite happy for people to work with COVID people and risking themselves, and they were clapping for them every Thursday night or whatever. But now that they're a bit hesitant, now it's all Hancock shaming them for not taking it up. I mean, that's disgusting. That is a bully. That's like a bully behaviour. You know, oh, go to work. We'll get this. We're making a vaccine. You're doing so well. We really appreciate you. But by the way, oh, you're hesitant. No, that's not right. And by the way, we've only got to give you 1% pay rise too. You know?
Yeah.
Really? I mean, do people not get it? The government is not our friend here.
Well, we're in a kind of war with them if people would just realise that. This new thing I'll touch on, which is going to be big news. You're going to see it hitting it's going to dominate the news cycles, this Sarah Everard thing. And it's another, okay, I won't go into the actual story, but people will understand the story. But what you're seeing is an instant, it's like the George Floyd thing, right? Where you had this horrible incident, and then you had the world was like, you had the Black Lives Matter, and they were ripping down the It was crazy. Portland, America, here, everybody was out on the streets for it. Now this girl, horrible story. But instantly there was a woman in the House of Lords today saying that men, if she could get her way, should be curfewed to be home by 6 o'clock. And you had Cressa Dick. Is that her name, Cressa Dick? Yeah. Yeah, that is her name. The head of the UK police. She was on tonight and she was saying every woman should be really scared and really worried about going out on the streets. So that's fear. You know the way this goes. She should be calming people down. She shouldn't be. Now, this is an incident in London. This is a one-off incident. This is not happening every day. It's a one-off incident by a cop. They've arrested a cop for it. But ultimately, she's saying all women should be scared. And now what we've got is vigils instantly, like George Floyd. Now we've got vigils planned straight away in London, and they're called Reclaim the City Streets. That's very, very fast for this to be all kicking into gear. So I'm just saying there's these psychological things are happening behind the scenes. I'm not saying that's right there or wrong, but
it's ironic. It's ironic because you know, I mean, so yeah, it's making people fearful. It's a very tragic event.
But it's a divide as well. It's men, you know.
Yeah, this anti-man, you know, because they want to stop people having relationships. So in other words, let's stop men and women having relationships as well. I mean, that's a good thing, because again, people will be social distancing, isolation. But what's ironic is, right? What's ironic, Carissa Dick saying that. We have got leaders, Nicola Sturgeon, one of them, Debbie Schreider, another, the advisor, and all these people, right? Sitting there saying that people should wear masks, children should wear masks in schools. Essentially, Nicola Sturgeon is mandating children to wear masks in Scottish schools, and it's harming them. That's basically mandating abuse. And shouldn't we be scared of that? No one ever tells us we have to be scared of our leader, like Nicola Sturgeon. But I think we have to be scared, because the Scottish government have not done any risk assessments on face masks, and they have not taken into account the harms that face masks do, the psychosocial aspect of not seeing a face, of communicating, of learning, and all what that entails, and the physiological effects of, you know, breathing in your own CO2 for prolonged periods of time. That to my mind is abuse. And we have a right to be frightened of our leaders, and I think it is now time we have to be frightened of them. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon's track record at the moment isn't great regarding, you know, the salmon thing. You know, she stood up in the daily briefing and said, "Oh, by the way, you know, the jury may have found salmon innocent, but that doesn't mean the behaviour didn't happen." I mean, what is
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah, that was bad.
That is a dangerous, unhinged person.
Yeah.
Say that. And then she makes out she's a great feminist. But how many women's businesses in Scotland have been put out of business since the lockdown started? You know, how many young girls' futures have been destroyed because of this, because of what's going on? And education's been ruined, and there'll be no jobs in the future because the economy's got to be knackered. I mean, she can't stand there and say she's pro women, pro girls, and she celebrated International Women's Day. You know, it's a joke because she's wiped out so much opportunities and hope and everything for so many young women and girls in Scotland, as well as men, of course. But I mean, if you want to play the feminist card, she can't play the feminist card.
That's right. And she can't really think like a mother when she's not a mother. She's not got kids of her own, so she doesn't know the first thing about sending a 13-year-old to school in a mass. She can't understand the parents' concerns there. But anyway, Bruce, just time-wise, we're slightly over our time, but that's good. We could have talked on a good bit. I think your last point there, that we should be scared of our government. There is an argument for that. They should maybe be a bit scared of us moving forward, because I think a lot more people are definitely waking up. And if people would speak out, that's the thing I would like to see, more people just talking out, say something. Don't sit there and accept this nonsense and not say anything. If you can't say something on Facebook or hold your own in a Zoom meeting, or, you know, stand up for what you believe and not be shut down, then we're all creating this problem, and we're all going to look back in years to come. You know, you go to a protest, you're not going to get a rubber bullet in the head or a water cannon. You're going to get a 60 quid ticket, maybe, that none of them have actually paid, and we're going to look back in years to come and say, but we never did it. Well, I think we're going to be a wee bit disappointed in ourselves if we can't speak up or turn up for these things. So, but anyway, Bruce, thank you for that. It's been absolutely excellent. And you and I will hang back and we'll have a wee quick chat after this as well. And thanks to everybody who chimed in. Sorry that it broke down at the start there. I'll piece those two segments together so that we get one little video later on, Bruce. But thank you for that. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Steve. Anytime.
Okay, all the very best. Thank you. Bye-bye.